Bum bum bottom 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 bum bum
Doobie doobie da da da, doobie doobie da da da, doobie doobie da da da, doobie doobie da da, doobie doobie da da, doobie doobie da da, doobie doobie da da da. Ba-da-da, 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 ba-ba-ba. Doopy-doopy-da-da-da. You are now in session with the Comic Book Couples Counseling Podcast. I'm Lisa Gullickson.
I'm Brad Gullickson.
And each month we evaluate a different iconic romance within the four-color realm. In this episode, we are transcending the confines of modal jazz and chasing the phantoms of our youth into our creator corner, where we're talking to Dave Chisholm about his magnum opus, Miles Davis and the Search for the Sound from Z2 Comics.
I know it feels like we just got back from San Diego Comic-Con, Lisa, but we are now packing for another event. We are going to Austin, Texas for the Fantastic Fest Film Festival, which will roll right into the Lost Weekend Film Festival at the Alamo Drafthouse in Winchester, Virginia, which will practically roll right into the New York Comic-Con.
It's really making us sound like we live this glamorous life. And let me assure you, listeners, we are not. We are just making poor decisions in the present.
Remember like 10 episodes ago when we were talking about how we were recording from a pile of dirty laundry from our San Diego Comic-Con dirty laundry? That pile is still there. We've still
made zero
sitting
progress.
on it.
I was like, are we seriously on the podcast going to talk about laundry again? But it is our Sisyphusian thing where it's just like, this will never be done.
I would love for our listeners to actually enter our home and see how we live. They're like, they're just joking. They're just joking about the piles of unbagged comics, their laundry piles. Surely they've actually washed their clothes in San Diego. We have not.
We don't even let our loved ones in our home. Like, we haven't, since the pandemic, nobody's been in here except for the like when they have to do like quarterly maintenance for our apartment complex, and we hate it.
Yeah, we hate that, and it always brings a smile to whatever person that is that enters the room. Lisa was supposed to have like a baking date today with her friend, and Lisa just assumed that her friend would want to do the baking over at their place, but they were like, no, let's do it at your place. And Lisa was like, no one can come in.
Well, luckily I have the standing excuse that like Brad is constantly editing audio, which is true.
Which is true. So you did go on your friend date. I don't even know, what do you call like a date with a friend?
I think a friend date
is
fine.
A friend date. It's fine.
Yeah.
You went with your friend date, and I was here editing
Furiously editing.
Yeah, because we have a lot to do before we leave for Texas in 5 days. We're recording this on Saturday. The listeners are listening to this almost a week from now, the next Friday. And we have, by the time the listeners are listening to this, we're in Texas and we're already stewing in movies as part of the Fantastic Fest Film Festival.
The Fantastic Fest Film Festival is a very important one to me.
Lisa, but I just want to say,
I was about to be vulnerable, but you can say your thing.
No, the reason we were saying that is because we have to edit at least we have to record and edit 2 podcasts before we leave, because we got to drop this one on Friday, which we've done because the listeners are listening to it on Friday. And then next week's episode has to be all scheduled and ready to go, because in 2 weeks we'll be at the Lost Weekend Film Festival. So we got to get a lot done, which meant I did a lot of editing. I just want to make sure everyone knows how much editing I was doing today.
It was a lot. And guess what? I give you full props because I do not help nor participate
and so
in that area.
you did not lie to your friend Amy when you said that you couldn't come here for podcast purposes, even though that was just a mask for our place is a war zone.
One thing, first things first, Amy does not listen to this podcast.
Sad.
Even the episodes where I'm like, I name you on this episode by first and last name.
She refuses.
Yeah. She's not interested
so
in
you
comics.
did just call her Amy. I did call her Amy. So you've now named the friend which friend it is.
Yeah.
Other friends might be listening.
And they're jealous, but they all know that they haven't hung out with me because I haven't hung out with any friends in months.
Because of the pit that we live in.
Exactly. Now can I say my...
Yeah, get vulnerable.
I think I said 1, and then I didn't follow up with a 2.
No.
1, Amy doesn't listen to this podcast.
Yes.
2, she would totally support me in lying because she knows what it's like to feel a little out of sorts sometimes.
Got it.
But
what a great friend.
She is the kind of friend whom I would tell her exactly what's going on because she wouldn't judge me, but I still won't let her in this apartment.
So get vulnerable now about Fantastic Fest. We're excited.
Yes. So like Fantastic Fest for me is something that I look forward to every year, which at a certain point in my anxiety would have never been true.
Right.
It was the kind of thing that really challenged me to go outside of my comfort zone.
A lot of socializing at Fantastic Fest.
It's a ton of socializing.
You're in that lobby, shoulder to shoulder with people, going to and fro from movies.
And they all are cooler than me.
And they all have opinions that are different than yours.
They have all accomplished more than me. And many of them are better looking than me, which I resent.
I mean, I don't agree with that last part, but I understand what you're saying.
But yeah, and the movies tend to be really intense. And there was like a certain time in my movie watching journey where my emetophobia would kind of control what I would see and not see.
And Fantastic Fest is not a great one for emetophobes.
Exactly, because it's all horror movies, genre movies, independent movies, and they really love a cheap gag. Yeah. I guess.
Pun intended.
Pun not intended, and I just grossed myself out. The first time I went to Fantastic Fest, it was not fantastic. It was
super
anxiety,
stressful.
Panic attack city. And I still have at least one panic attack every time I go. But now I've folded it into the experience, and now I'm at a place where I'm like, yay, it's Fantastic Fest again.
And you've had a lot more experience covering festivals as press. The first time you went, you did not go as press.
Yes.
So I was off doing a lot of the interviews without you.
Yeah, and sometimes just having a professional distance from something where it's just like, well, I'm not here for my own entertainment. I'm here also to do coverage. Like, that changes the game a little bit for me.
And I think when we covered it in 2019 for In the Mouth of Darkness and Film School Rejects, and we got the opportunity to interview people like Bong Joon-ho and Takashi Miike on the same day, also Taika Waititi and Rian Johnson, like, that distracts you from your other anxieties.
Which, like, is something that I've kind of folded into my being, my decision-making process, is when something scares me, does the scare outweigh how much I want to do it? Because sometimes, because I always wanted to go to Fantastic Fest, and I've always wanted to be the kind of person who can socialize and meet people, and then go to a movie, and then blah, blah, blah. So, like, I really did the thing of, do I want to be able to do this more than I don't want to be scared? And I erred on the side of yes.
Yes.
And there's things that I would not do that, like, scare me more than I want to do them, and I just don't do those things.
Yeah. We don't do a lot of those, like, late night drinking parties and things like that.
No, I will not do those at all.
Yeah. And there are movies you're just not going to enjoy. For example, at this year's Fantastic Fest, one of the big movies is Macon Blair's adaptation of The Toxic Avenger.
Yeah, I'm not seeing Toxic Avenger.
And that's my priority number one.
What was the film last year that got, like, Oscar attention?
Oh, gosh, you're putting me on the spot. I cannot remember. Oh, Triangle of Sadness.
Yeah.
Stay the heck away if you're an emetophobe.
Yeah.
A really interesting movie, but not for Lisa.
But I've seen some of my all-time favorite movies at Fantastic Fest.
Parasite.
Yes.
We were one of the first audiences to see that film.
That was amazing. Anna and the Apocalypse, which is not VF, but it's a musical, and it's about zombies, and I freaking love it.
Yeah, and there's a lot going on. You haven't had a chance really to look at the film guide.
No.
But I want to highlight a few things that I think maybe Comic Book Couples Counseling listeners would find interesting at this year's Fantastic Fest. So I mentioned Toxic Avenger. You know, Toxic Avenger does have roots with Marvel Comics. Toxic Crusaders, the animated TV series. I'm a little tempted to start collecting those comics. When we were at Baltimore Comic Con last week, I saw a few. They're not super cheap, but they're not expensive either. So I may dive into buying Toxic Avenger comics. There is a comic book adaptation called We Are Zombies, directed by the RKSS crew. They did Turbo Kid, they did Summer of '84, and this is an adaptation of The Zombies That Ate the World from Guy Davis and Jenny Frison. And I'm very excited about that.
Me too.
It's going to be gory and nasty. And you got to watch out if you're an emetophobe for the RKSS gang, but they make quality movies as well. There is a film called Conan, not Conan, like Conan. It's actually Conann, but it is a twist on the Robert E. Howard character, and it's shot all in black and white. Very excited about that. And Gareth Edwards' new science fiction film, The Creator, which is going to open worldwide really darn soon, but they're going to have an early screening of that. That looks fascinating. There are just a bunch of really strange, gnarly, and off-kilter movies that excite this weirdo talking right now. Mike Flanagan's going to premiere the first couple of episodes of The House of Usher, which will eventually premiere on Netflix. Oh, here's the thing I'm maybe the most excited about. They're doing a repertory screening of Caligula, and Malcolm McDowell is going to be in attendance. And we have put in for a Malcolm McDowell interview. Will it happen? Probably not, but maybe. Cross your fingers. That would be wild. But I've made a list for you, Lisa. We need to look at that at some point before Wednesday. And once we do that, I think we'll feel a lot better. And also once we pack and maybe do a little laundry.
I do stake my reputation on always wearing clean clothes.
Yeah, we always have clean clothes on. When you see us out in the world, those clothes are clean. Don't worry. We've also bathed. It's just that the pile never seems to go away.
Yeah. And neither does our pile of unread comics.
Oh, you got that right.
We are constantly consuming. We are constantly reading. And yet, our to-read pile is towering ever higher.
I'm extremely excited about this week's episode. Dave Chisholm, he's been on the podcast before talking about his book, Enter the Blue, and he's back with Miles Davis and the Search for the Sound. And I loved Enter the Blue. No one illustrates music the way that Dave Chisholm does. And I'm always in awe of his ability to communicate sound. And he knocks it up a level or two with Miles Davis and the Search for the Sound. And I'm not a Miles Davis person. I'm not really a jazz person. And maybe Miles Davis also wasn't really a jazz person either. Mm-hmm. We get into that a little bit. But this book, when I was reading it, I started it. And I was like, this is really good. And then it gets great really quickly. And then it never loses that momentum.
I am really terrified of the idea of coming across as hyperbolic about my enthusiasm for this book.
Too late.
Especially coming off of our conversation with Christian Ward talking about Batman City of Madness, because that is also a book I really, really love.
I mean, I think we said this at the end of last week's episode.
This fall is killing it.
Yeah, and these next 4 or 5 episodes are circling 4 or 5 of our favorite comic books of 2023.
Exactly.
And I also don't want to come off as like a hyperbolic, Brad loves everything type of person, even though I'm sure that's what it seems like to a lot of people. And you're just going to have to take our word for it. But I think Miles Davis and the Search for the Sound is a top 5 comic of the year.
It's amazing. It's amazing. I want all of my friends to read it. I'm going to buy it for my brother for Christmas.
Yeah, I want to get it for my dad.
But in my intro for Christian Ward, I said masterpiece, and I'm like, masterpiece isn't quite the right word. So for this episode, I used magnum opus, But that's still not quite the right word. So I looked up the definition of magnum opus.
Yes, Lisa.
And a magnum opus is a large and important work that is the most important work of an artist's life. And I feel like it's kind of premature to say that about Dave Chisholm.
It's almost cruel to say that about Dave Chisholm.
Like,
He's
no
a young man.
Exactly. But like, there's still, if you guys know the word, this is a work that is also like a Horcrux. Like, it's like containing a piece of this person's soul, and to read it is such a freaking privilege because you get to see the inner workings of the artist even better.
Yeah.
But there's not a good word for it.
Yeah, there's not a good word for it. I see what you're saying. I think like the best way to underscore what you're talking about is actually to go to Dave Chisholm's TikTok feed.
Ooh, look at you cue this up.
Because he did a little video where he explained the importance of this particular work to him as an artist. And he says it perfectly in this TikTok. So should we just upload this TikTok? And also, we did ask his permission if we could rip this from his TikTok feed and put it into our podcast, and he did say yes.
Yeah.
So we're not thieves. Dave Chisholm is about to enter our love nest, but before he does that, his TikTok is going to walk in first.
Okay, my involvement for making my next graphic novel, Miles Davis and the Search for the Sound, actually has kind of a long story, so let's go all the way back to the very beginning. Okay, that's me. These are my parents. My parents are hippies, basically, and they love music. My dad in particular loves jazz music, especially the music of Miles Davis and Charles Mingus, especially this album. See, this album, Sketches of Spain, which is a tremendously incredible album, is the first music I ever remember hearing in my whole life, and it just mystified me as a small child. So I grew up in a household that was full of music and full of comics. This is an old drawing I did of Spider-Man a very long time ago. When I was 11, I started playing the trumpet, and I loved it. And my trumpet hero was the one and only Miles Davis. All throughout high school, I played a ton of trumpet, I played a ton of music, and I painted a gazillion paintings of Miles Davis. When it came time to start college, I chose to major in music because I got a bigger scholarship in music. Music has been really kind to me. I've gotten 3 degrees, I have a doctorate in jazz trumpet, and I've played tons of cool gigs. This is me playing at the Umbria Jazz Festival in 2012 as part of an ensemble that actually played all of the music that Miles Davis and Gil Evans recorded together. I didn't play the Miles Davis parts though, I was just part of the ensemble. But all the time I was going to school for music and gigging and all that stuff, I was still drawing comics and still in love with the medium of comics. When I finished my doctorate, I made this graphic novel called Instrumental. It was published by Z2 Comics, and it has a soundtrack of original music that goes with it. Anyway, Z2 Comics started doing a lot more music-related books, and they were contacted by the estate of the famous jazz saxophonist Charlie Parker to make a graphic novel about part of his life. And so they reached out to me. This is the book we ended up making, Chasin the Bird, Charlie Parker in California, and it did really well. It got great reviews, and it turned out totally awesome. That book found its way into the hands of Miles Davis's son, Aaron Davis, and then the idea kind of sprang from his brain and made its way back to Z2, and they made a deal and licensed the book. I made a pitch, and the pitch got approved, and I spent about a year plus putting the book together. I gotta tell you, this book turned out so good. So yeah, in so many ways, this book is a real culmination of my lifelong obsessions of music, in particular the music of Miles Davis, and then the comics medium. And it's such an honor, such a thrill to have made this book, and I can't wait for it to come out. Thank you for asking this question.
So as you can hear in that TikTok, Miles Davis and the Search for the Sound is a little bit of a miracle. Like, all the stars had to align for the Miles Davis estate to come to Dave Chisholm, who was ready to receive this assignment, and then he delivers it, and it becomes a huge statement, not just about Miles Davis, but about Dave Chisholm.
Yeah, it's the consummation of something that he has been fixedly thinking about since he was a literal child. It's so beautiful. He delivers so much more than just an impeccably researched densely informational comic book, which it also is, by
Yeah,
the way.
right.
So he does this kind of like zoom in thing where we get all of this information about Miles Davis, but then he zooms out. And from that, we get to draw lessons from Miles Davis's life that we can immediately apply to our own lives.
He approaches Miles Davis's autobiography, which he adapts directly. Like words from that are in this book. He approaches Miles Davis's autobiography the way that we approach every comic book. Like inside here is me, and I'm going to find me. And when he translates that into the graphic form, he creates something entirely different that's not the autobiography. It's a totally different experience. It's much more internal. It's much more metaphorical.
The book opens with child Miles Davis walking through the woods, and suddenly he hears this amazing sound that immediately like enchants him, and like he is filled with this sense of like wonder of like, what is that? And the way Dave illustrates it is as this enormous impressionist drawing of a man or like a creature. And then for the rest of that book, Miles is trying to recreate the sound that he heard as a child in the forest, which is based on a story. Like, it's not apocryphal. It's like a story that it might be apocryphal, but Miles Davis believed that this was his journey.
It's in his autobiography.
Exactly. But as a reader, watching someone who is brilliant like Miles Davis constantly struggle to meet their own ideals or trying to meet some kind of personal goal while the circumstances are always changing around you is so instructional for me. It's so relatable for me. This idea of like, I have a version of myself that I think that I can be. And if the world would stop for a second and stop changing and adapt to my whim, then I can find that thing. And that's just like not true.
When we had Dave on the show last, you were not able to participate in that conversation.
And it breaks my heart.
And it was so frustrating to me because I knew that you, as a musician, had a way to connect to Dave and to his stories in a way that I did not. I definitely do connect to his stories, but your absence in that last conversation was just this... Well, it was this ghost, this phantom that hung over me. And so I'm so glad that you're here for this conversation about Miles Davis and the search for the sound. And we're going to get to Dave real quick. But before we can do that, Lisa, we got to do a little thing called referrals.
Referrals.
The referrals segment is new and sponsored by Omnibus, the modern digital comic book store and reader app carrying your favorite single issues, volumes, and omnibuses all day and date. Just like your local comic book store, you pay per book, but digital.
Their focus is on building an excellent customer shopping and reading experience and using novel discovery features to help fans find their next new favorite book. They feature top-tier content and already have many of the top publishers in comics today.
In the spirit of helping people find their next new favorite book, we're launching this new referrals program, sponsored by Omnibus in every Comic Book Couples Counseling episode.
The idea is to give our counselees, that's you guys, further reading on the themes of the episode. Like for Dave Chisholm's episode, it's about seeking, it's about jazz, it's about finding yourself through art. Think of it as us sending you to specialists to further your healing journey through comic books.
So, Lisa, you're going to go first. What's your referral today?
My referral is Canopus by Dave Chisholm.
What?
And before you say that that's a cop-out because it's just by the same guy, it's not necessarily on the same themes, I'm going to politely ask you to hold your horses because both books are about seeking and the idea that you have to look back in order to go forward. I had not read Canopus before interviewing Dave Chisholm. If I had, I would have totally brought this up, but Canopus is about this person, Helen, who is an astronaut who finds herself stranded on a distant planet with no memories of her past, but just this desperate sense of like, there's been this catastrophic event on Earth and I have to go back. But in seeking the solution to returning to Earth, she starts triggering and dredging up these memories. And that is one of the main themes of Miles Davis is he is rehabbing his hand after an injury, and it's caused him to look back on his career. And that's something Miles Davis is a person who proudly never looks back. So those ideas are kind of informing each other.
Oh man, I also need to read this because I've read, Chasing the Bird, Into the Blue, and now Miles Davis and the Search for the Sound. But I love the idea of seeing what Dave Chisholm could do with a totally different setting and a totally different genre like science fiction.
And the art is also completely different. Dave Chisholm is one of these artists who can literally do anything. He is so extremely talented, but he really is going for something different with Canopus.
Yeah, and I'm the last person that's going to chastise anyone for picking the same author as a bridge from another comic. I'll never attack you, Lisa, because our main topic is by this author, and then your referral is going to be also by this author, because that's what we do, right? Like when you fall in love with a creator, you go down their rabbit hole and you devour all of their books. And in devouring all of their books, you start to see the themes that they're constantly picking at, that scab that just won't go away.
Thank you, my love. I feel so seen and understood. But what is your referral?
So my referral takes a character from Miles Davis and the Search for the Sound, a character who's really just a cameo in the Dave Chisholm book, and makes that person the focus. It is called Hendrix Electric Requiem from Ablaze, and it's the creation of Mattia Columbara and Gianluca Macconi. Jimi Hendrix, right? And Jimi Hendrix, like Miles Davis, is a person I know as an icon, but I don't actually know too much about. And Hendrix Electric Requiem, like the Miles Davis and the Search for the Sound, starts when Hendrix is a little child, and he discovers music through his grandmother. And I find, comics about music, and we talk about this with Dave, it's so often you just cannot express music visually. And when people do, they fail to do so. I think Dave Chisholm absolutely achieves that expression in a very vibrant and powerful way.
And for me, it's a person who understands music theory, kind of literalistic, which is amazing.
Yes. And Electric Requiem approaches music visually, but in a totally different manner. When Jimi Hendrix is a little kid, when he's Buster and he's with his gran, and he hears a song that affects him for the first time, he is transported. So it's almost like the song starts and it's a new scene. And it's a scene that's fantastical. And every time he encounters music throughout his education, he is being zipped back and forth to these worlds that he can barely understand, but then he starts to understand them, and then it folds into his internal life. It's all about exploring his internal life and this escape route that music can be, and then how he takes hold of that escape route and then makes it a path, and that is all executed visually. And whenever I see somebody do music in a new way, I think of Dave Chisholm, and that is the bar you have to match. And what I like about Electric Requiem is that it doesn't match that in the same way, but it goes for it in a different way. Music is music and comics are comics, and they don't really meet too often. And when they do, it's oil and water. But then here you get, Miles Davis and the Search for the Sound and Hendrix Electric Requiem, and they're meshing. And it's, that's a high. That's a high that's hard to come down from.
Man, that sounds amazing.
It is.
I want to read your referral.
I want to read your referral.
Lucky for us, they are both available on Omnibus.
I'm really enjoying my time with Omnibus. I've spent the last several weeks just browsing through its digital aisles, and I just feel like they are filling a void. We need a digital comic book store like this one, and I can sense what they are building here, and I'm so freaking excited.
The app is free. This is not a subscription service. You literally walk into the app, buy the books that you want, and then you have them in your collection.
If you do follow up with these referrals and read these comics, Lisa and I want to know.
Yeah.
So hit us up on whatever social, CBCC Podcast, or email us, cbccpodcast@gmail.com.
Referrals.
And now let's get to our conversation with Dave Chisholm talking about Miles Davis and the search for the sound. As we've already said, it's coming from Z2 Comics. It won't be published until November 7th, so this conversation is going to act as a hype machine for its release. But while you're waiting for that, check out our referrals, go read those comics, and also check out Dave's other books, Into the Blue, Chasing the Bird. They are exceptional and give you an idea of what Dave is building toward with Miles Davis and the search for the sound. And with that final little bit of business behind us, bring on Dave into the love nest. Dave, welcome back to Comic Book Couples Counseling. Hello.
Hi. Thank you for having me back.
We are stoked to talk Miles Davis with you. Lisa and I not only just finished reading the comic, we just finished going through all your TikToks about the comic.
There's not a ton. There's a modest amount.
Yeah, all right.
But what I love about your TikToks in particular, discussing the book, is your confidence in the book itself. You state at a couple points that you feel like this is the best thing that you've made. And I'm so excited to see that enthusiasm and that confidence with this comic. How does that feel?
Well, Brad.
Oh no.
I don't want to start on like a bad foot here, but like I just get really like psyched about the work I'm making. I make books that I would want to read. And so that kind of stereotype about artists with like imposter syndrome, I don't feel that way about my own work. I like the work that I do. I like the books that I make. Obviously, like in hindsight, I might look at something and be like, oh, I could make that hand better, or make that, or like that line of dialogue could be cleaned up, or this or that or the other. But overall, like, I think at this point I've made a lot of comics, and I know what I like, and why would I waste my time making anything except for exactly what I want to read. So it's funny because I really believe in all of the books that I make. But this book is a particularly special one just because I have such a lifelong personal connection and lifelong fandom of like Miles Davis's music and personal history. Like it's really like it's a very personal project for me. To get this opportunity was such a huge like privilege, and terrifying privilege as well. And so to get this opportunity, like, I knew that I couldn't get it wrong, because 16-year-old me would like really just travel forward in time and murder present day me, because I had to get this right. And so it was a long time coming. It took a while to make this book, kind of, and I think that it turned out really good. I'm really happy with it. Yeah, I'm super psyched about it, and I'm not afraid to tell people that it's really good.
So we just finished discussing this comic in the introduction, and we were very effusive. We were heaping lots of praise onto the book. We think it's incredible, and we've read all your books, and we feel like this is the next, the next level of your work. It feels like a leveling up. And I also really appreciate and understand what it must be like to have to execute this book perfectly, not just for your sake, but for the Miles Davis estate, and for all the fans of Miles Davis. That's a lot of pressure to put on yourself.
Yeah, it was. I mean, it was pretty darn stressful at times. In particular, like at one point in the process, or very early in the process, how do I put this? I was overzealous about a number of pages I was going to get to tell the story. And so I had a script, and I was maybe 2/3 of the way through the script.
of a 232 page book. And then I found out, like the most you can do is 150 pages. And so I had to cut like 80 pages out of this. And it was really, really, I was sort of at a crossroads, and like at this spot where I was like, I could do like part 1 and go to like 1970 or 1968 or 69 or something like that, right when he goes electric, basically. I thought about it, and I was like, you know what, I can't do that. I have to put everything in this one book. I have to like figure out a way to compress it down and cut stuff out that doesn't absolutely need to be there. Maybe find a new framing device for the whole book, so that the stuff that I cut out, like, so kind of this search for the sound angle came at that point in the process. So like,
Okay.
and it was really gave it a real focus, because then the sound, this like search, this like restlessness of his life was like the trunk of the tree, and the rest of as things like kind of get further and further away from that, they become like all the branches, and then it's just deciding where to cut the branches off, what things need to be there for the sound, for like what aspects of his life influenced, kind of showed up in his quest for this sound, what things sort of like maybe distracted him from that, which things where the big influences and stuff like that, and then how far back on those branches do you go before you're kind of in the weeds, and then when you pull back and look at that tree, is it like a complete enough picture of his life to be like a satisfying book. And so that was the biggest challenge for this book. That was the thing that stressed me out the most, and I knew from the beginning that I wanted, the cool thing about Miles is that there are like a decent number, or a good number of like interviews and like his autobiography, a lot of him recalling his life in his own words and giving his opinions in his own words. And so I knew like from the very, very beginning that I was going to like tell this story using Miles Davis as like a de facto narrator. And so like that was sort of like also a strategic way to kind of like make sure that I wasn't editorializing like too much. Like it's tough, because no matter what, it's an interpretation of this. It's like it's not a scholarly. I mean, the research part of it, sure, that's scholarly in a sense, but the reading of this is not meant to be like a real it's supposed to be like trippy and weird and like exciting and like visually like boundary breaking and everything. It's not meant to be a dry documentary. And so giving it that first person point of view, in his own words, made it feel like a way to keep it on it, like as honest as I could to like his point to Miles, and that while at the same time like not letting it kind of divulge in that, like not letting it sort of like disintegrate into like academic kind of gobbledygook. I don't know. Yeah, it's in it, and at a certain point I was like so far along in the book, and I felt like, oh, this is going pretty well. It's looking pretty good. And I would stop every once in a while and like read everything in the book from the beginning to the point where I was, because I did all of the main chapters first, and then I did the inter-chapter 1982 parts of the story at the end of everything. That was the last thing I drew for the book. But reading through it just to say like, okay, does this hang together? Do I need to add a page here if I can? And every time I would add a page, I would have to add 2 pages and take out 2 pages because of all the double page spreads in the book. And because if you take out 1 page, then your page turns get messed up and stuff like that. So it was a real kind of balancing act of constantly. There were a few times in the process where I did stop and say, okay, this doesn't need to be here, and I get on and like email, Miles Davis's son and say like, all right, I would like to make this edit, and here's what I want to do, to say like, do you guys approve of this? Is this get like family like approval and stuff like that? And honestly, Aaron was like just really great to work with. He was super, super positive and really helpful throughout.
Reading the book, I do totally feel that like pruned and curated nature, it makes sense to me that you started with like the most, and then you had to like find the story, because you were processing so many mediums, because you're going, not only are you listening to the music, but you're going through all of those interviews, and also there you're making visual references to his paintings. In your last interview with Just Brad, I couldn't be there because I was working, and for that I am so angry, but I'm glad to be here now. You talked about your three guys. You have like your child, your bully, and your egghead, you know, and then you're at it, like your child is like, just play and be creative, and your bully is like, no, you have to edit, and your egghead is like, I could get more information in here, right?
Yeah, sure.
And now you have this like fourth person that is Miles Davis, like also there with you. It must have been crazy. You must have felt crazy. Did you feel crazy?
I think probably I'll show you something that
Yay.
speaks to the craziness of it. Here are a couple of like Miles Davis biographies, and like I like fold pages, and if you look like every page is folded, and it's like, what's the point? It's like totally insane.
That's Elisa.
So like literally, like as I'm reading your book, so like one of my process is when I prepare to a book for the podcast is to keep a character list. So as I'm reading the Miles Davis book, I'm keeping a character list, and I felt just completely overwhelmed.
Oh, really?
Like just because of the way I was approaching the book. Like I was approaching the book wrong, where like, because
you're collecting all these characters, all these band members, all these people that fall in and out of his life.
I was reading from an egghead perspective.
Sure.
Where when you come from the perspective of, oh, he's finding his sound, and all of these people are just ingredients. They're just options, like that he is like kind of like processing through.
Yeah. I mean, like you could even go so far as to say there's only one character in this whole book, really. And everybody else is like kind of like is like a very peripheral kind of character from his like laser focus on like his music. I mean, in a lot of ways, this is how like Miles embodies that like troubled artist archetype, right? Where in particular, like the relationships that aren't with other musicians kind of like seem like they were like set like a second status, like a lower status for him, right? And he was so like obsessed with this, like he was just an obsessed guy. I don't know. I mean, I'm sorry, this is a terrible answer.
No, it's a great answer.
I have like a 5-week-old baby in the house right now, and so hopefully I'm giving you guys good quality answers here. But I apologize if my answers ramble a little bit or kind of like walk down a path and just kind of stop. But basically, like the book absolutely fails the Bechdel test, for example. Like utterly fails it. Like there's only a few scenes that Miles isn't in. It's almost like there's no way this book could have possibly passed that test. And in a way, like that's kind of it's like an examination of a guy who like had a troubled relationship with like the women in his life, right? From his own point of view. So it's kind of like a little, that was the other part of the book that was honestly pretty stressful, was like when I'm sitting there writing the script, it can't be like hero worship. This can't be like the greatest hits of his life and then not acknowledge the kind of demons, the sizable kind of like demons and problematic, to say the least, aspects of his personal story and everything, aspects of his life. And so I'm sitting there like writing the script and putting this stuff in, and I'm like, man, this is like pretty dark. And then sending it to like his like family and saying like, what do you think of this? And it's like, but then like after I like finished the script, I watched the movie with Don Cheadle. And I was like, this was made with the cooperation of his family, and that movie is really doesn't shy away from any of this stuff either. So I was like, they know. I mean, even like his autobiography he's like almost like uncomfortably candid in his book about like he's just really upfront about like kind of the bad stuff he did and everything. It's like on one hand it's refreshing, on the other hand it's like alarming. So anyway. What were we talking about? Oh my gosh.
I have a question about the other framing device or theme that I see in this book, and that is like that phantom sound that he heard in the forest as a child.
Yeah.
And like what I think of when I think of Miles Davis is he was always changing. Like the thing that was true about Miles Davis is that he was always changing up what he was doing. But by reverse engineering it to, oh, actually, he wasn't necessarily running away from, but he was running like towards this phantom sound that he heard as a child. So was that sound in the forest, was that something that he talked about, or was that something okay?
There's a scene in the first the first chapter. He's on the rooftop with Freddie Webster, and he's talking about like what got him into music. There's a panel where he's talking about the sound he heard in the forest that night, and that's all like a pretty like close to a direct quote from his autobiography.
So was that always the beginning of your book? Or did you go like, okay, actually, when I'm pruning my tree, if I put this at the beginning, there is actually a thread that connects?
Yeah, it was. Yeah, it was always like that was always the so there's a couple things that go into that. So like that story, that evocative story about him visiting his grandparents in Arkansas and seeing that and hearing this sound from the woods of this like mysterious music, and then saying like, from that point, I knew what I wanted my music to sound like, right? It's a really curious thing. And he goes back to it several times in his autobiography about like, I wanted to get that down home backwood sound, like that night in Arkansas, and going back to it several times in his autobiography. And then I was like, well, you know, it's a comic book, so it's like a visual medium, and it's not a sound medium. So I want this sound to have like a visual hook. And then there's that quote by Miles that I think is on the back of the book. That's like, I see sounds, and when I'm playing, like he's basically says he has like synesthesia. And I was like, okay, well, I can like that can be part of it. Like stir that in. And then like, kind of talking about this, thinking about and he talks about this in an interview, I think, about like what he's always striving to achieve with his sound is like the sound of like the human voice, having his trumpet sound like a darker, like a human voice singing, like, and that's what he heard in the forest that day was that. So then I had this kind of like conceit, this visual hook that was like, the sound that Miles is aspiring to will look like a ghost. It will look like a phantom kind of thing. And when it comes out of the forest the first time, it'll be like, 5 stories tall, this big, like scary thing. And then it'll show up out of his trumpet. At the beginning, you won't see that sound out of his trumpet, right? It'll take a little while for that thing to fully form, to kind of represent him finding his feet as like an improviser over the first like decade of his career or so. So like when he's playing with Charlie Parker, his sound looks like Charlie Parker's with those squares, which is like from
Chasing the Bird, yeah.
From Chasin the Bird, right? And except that it's like that other color that it represents, like that you only see in the book as representative of like Miles's sound, that kind of like teal, cyan kind of color. And then when we go to the next chapter, I know it's kind of lame to explain it to you guys.
Oh no,
right?
but I
but it's all very purposeful, right? So the next chapter, that box gets rounded off a little bit, and the art softens a little bit, and then there's panel borders that are circular in that one, whereas in that first chapter the panels are all like tall and skinny, and he's always confined. If you notice, he's always boxed in the first chapter by Charlie Parker, right? So we're seeing him playing through like Charlie Parker's profile of his saxophone, and it makes a little window, and you see Miles kind of trapped inside of there a little bit. And then when he meets Gil Evans and sort of like finds a foil for his sound, or like a muse, or some sort of like, muse isn't the right word, like a co-conspirator in sound.
Yeah.
And then obviously the third chapter, things kind of go off the rails a little bit, and then get back on the rails. And then by the end of that third chapter, when he plays at the Newport Jazz Festival and plays around midnight, that's kind of like where he finds his sound. And that's the first time you see this like ghost coming out of his trumpet, and not just like the ghost from the beginning. And then as I was like doing this research, I thought like, well, maybe there's some imagery from his artwork that I could use as like as like this shape, because he's always he talks about his painting as being the same thing as his music.
Right.
And he says like, well, when I paint, it's just the same thing. And so then I found that one picture that I really love of the figure, and then that kind of becomes another like added layer of the visual hook. And that was another thing that like when I pitched that idea, I was really nervous, because it's like a bit of a, you know, it'll either work for you as a reader or it's the stupidest thing ever, right?
Oh, I love it.
thanks,
But I might be stupid.
No, you're not stupid. Like it to me, as someone who has never really experienced Miles Davis in any way outside of a Don Cheadle movie, and you know, in college listening to Birth of the Cool, like the gateway into this comic, that opening where he's had the stroke and he's lost the movement, his mobility in his right hand, and the doctor tells him, you know, you put this pencil in and just start scribbling. And starting there, and starting with Miles Davis late in life, discovering a new art, and then discovering how this new art connects to his old art, like already I'm on tears. And I'm like, pages into this story. It's just such an interesting gateway into this life, and just a perspective that, I mean, that reveals that I knew nothing about Miles Davis.
But what I think is really interesting is like Miles Davis was a musician first and a musician above all else. And then he discovered his art, where for you, those were two parallel things in your life. And I love how you talk about on your TikTok, I love how you talk about like one of your impulses when you discovered Miles Davis was not just to play the trumpet, but also to paint him.
Like I teach a lot, right? I teach a lot. And I teach a lot of like younger kids. So I teach a couple college classes, and I also teach private music lessons. And
I also teach private music lessons.
That's cool.
Yeah.
And sometimes like as a teacher with those younger students, I'm talking like 11, 12, 13, where the students don't have any focus, and they're like, they don't really want to be there. With those students, I do sometimes take a route through learning. For those students, it's really circuitous, really like long and slow. We take the long, slow path. I've had some parents like take me to task for that.
Right,
We're going too slow. It's going too slowly and everything. And I like to think that like those students, my job for students that are that age is to give them as many tools as I can for when they need those tools.
Right.
Like, and they don't need those tools at that young age. They're just like Energizer bunnies, like just doing whatever they do, right? And then at a certain point around like 16 or 17, they will like desperately need some means of self-expression, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it'll suddenly become like really, really important to them, and they might not even like understand like the benefit of taking those lessons at, like they won't understand like that the seeds were planted when they were taking lessons with me or taking art class or whatever. And like for me, I think like Miles Davis's music was something that like I was somewhat like tangentially, I mean, I it's been part of my whole life, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then at a certain point when I was in high school, I just desperately needed that music, like so deeply. I needed that music in my life, like every day, and it became a real like artistic North Star for me. And so I just was like super obsessed with Miles Davis. And you know, like a big part of Miles Davis as a brand, which just makes my skin crawl to say, is that he just is like a cool looking dude. Mm-hmm. He's a handsome guy, right? He's a cool looking, at every stage of his career, he had like different looks. It's kind of like, as a comic book fan, it's like, you know, you have like all the different Wolverine costumes or something like that. Like, which Miles is your favorite? Oh, I don't know, the one with the yellow costume and like the the black stripes and the blue little shoulder things. Oh wait, that's Wolverine, not Miles Davis, right?
Totally.
And thinking about like kind of blue Miles is this, and Live Evil Miles is that, and like 1980s Miles is this whole other thing, right? And I just kind of like you can see it in this book. Like that's one of the other big like visual conceits in the book is like having the visuals shift to reflect Miles Davis's shift in his musical output. And I think that that's something that I've always been interested in, even from back then in high school, was like, is there a way I can capture the essence of this music in a painting?
Mm-hmm.
So one of the paintings I did of Miles, I don't know if it's in the TikTok video, this one right here, this is a painting, and you can tell that I didn't quite finish it because this is just a piece of paper taped to the canvas, right? I just kind of gave up. But I was thinking when I did it that like this is kind of blue, and this is like to me the essence of like Miles Smiles, and then this was obviously like Live Evil or Bitches Brew or something like that. Oh gosh. And maybe this was going to be like Birth of the Cool or something like that. Right. And sort of like thinking like so this has been sort of like floating around in my head for like 25 years or something like that. Right. So yeah, I mean, I don't even remember what the hell I'm talking about.
Yeah, no, it was my original question.
Yeah.
So like, it reminds me of like something I say to my students all of the time. Like, so what you do with your students is like, you're giving them the tools that they don't know that they're ultimately going to need. My thing with my students is that like, oh, I'm setting up a relationship with music. Like what I'm trying to do is just tell them the stove is not like
the stove is not hot.
That like I've heard that story so many times of like I took piano when I was 12 and I quit because I hated practicing, but I have this expectation for my child now. You know what I mean? I've heard that like 6,000 times. So like the thing that I say to my students is like, oh, well, drawings and pictures and that kind of thing, that's what we do to decorate space. Music is what we do to decorate time. Is the thing that I say, this is a way of decorating time. So I think like, okay, when I'm teaching you to be a musician, I'm teaching you, the discipline to be an artist in any kind of like fashion. Like those same skills, like you might use to become a musician, you might ultimately end up to do some other kind of art.
Yeah.
I'm sure there are lessons that you have taken from Miles Davis that you find yourself applying to other areas of your life.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Yeah. I mean, Miles was a really courageous as an artist, right? And that's something like being like really free, like open to just changing your identity, like if you feel like it as an artist. Of course, like how Miles got to be that way is a different story that I think, I don't know, I think I touched on that a little bit in the book kind of tangentially, but yeah, I mean, and that's something that's always been inspiring to me. Like I tell my students, when you're dealing with music and art, take the biggest risks that you can, because nobody dies, nobody gets pregnant, nobody like there's no what's the worst thing that happens is you play a bad note, you have a laugh about it, and you move on, right? You write a song that's not good, and who cares? Like who cares? You never play it, you just throw it away. Or you draw a picture and it looks stupid, who cares? It's fine. And once you kind of realize like, actually, like we're not skydiving here, I can take risks, it's okay, it's kind of liberating.
I want to go back to the framing device a little bit with Miles recuperating and basically scribbling this comic into creation. And for me, the brilliance of that is you get to lay out his story artistically from Dave's perspective, and then you have Miles's words in there that give an honesty and authenticity, a perspective that's extremely unique. But where the excitement comes in for me is when the art doesn't necessarily match up with what Miles is saying. And the story, the visual story, sometimes challenges what the captions say.
Yeah.
And can you talk a little bit about the tension that is there?
I'm so glad you noticed that. That means a lot to me because, again, thinking about like how can I level up as a comic book creator, I knew that there was going to be a lot of narration in this book, and just in general, like I dislike narration. I dislike it, and I couldn't escape it with this book. There's no way it was going to have narration in this book. There's too much story to tell. And so I thought to myself, well, I can tell a story with visuals, and I can tell a story with narration. They can be two separate stories that then are like altered by the fact when you juxtapose them. And this is not, I didn't invent this idea. This is what comics are all about.
Yeah.
Like when you're talking about like literary comics or whatever. So yeah, I mean, I think like juxtaposing him recounting his relationship with his mother while we see him kind of like having a meet cute, it takes a scene that would maybe normally be sort of like heartwarming in a way, and makes it really kind of like, oh, something bad. This is foreboding and kind of scary now, right? And yeah, I mean, I think it just kind of gave me the opportunity to have interesting juxtapositions and to like alter all of the things that are happening in the writing and all the things that are happening in the visuals. And it's just a lot more economic in terms of storytelling, right? Mm-hmm. It means that I'm not like, hopefully there's not too many instances in the book of me drawing the thing and then describing the thing that I'm drawing with the words.
But also, like, you get to point out areas of Miles Davis's own hypocrisy, and also, like, I think like using Miles Davis's own quotes gives you room to do things that are not true, because Miles Davis is telling his story from his perspective, and not everything he's going to say is going to be true.
Yeah, actually, there's one point in his where when he's recounting the album Walkin' in his book, that the record Walkin', he lists the wrong drummer.
Oh, how fun.
And I completed the page, and it was like Art Blakey on drums. And then I was like, cool. And then I was like, I don't think Art Blakey's a drummer on that album. And then I went and looked, and it wasn't Art Blakey. It's Kenny Clark or whatever. And I had like a little miniature crisis, because like, what do I do? Do I change the words? What do I do? So that is a pretty trivial example, but then like, you're right. Like there are times where it's like, you know, while his most of the time he's kind of alarmingly candid in his own accounts. You know, I tried not to challenge its accuracy too much. But it's more.
But you
like,
don't have to, because it's from his perspective.
Yeah, it's more like the kind of like you know, the frustrating inconsistencies that you find in anybody, and then kind of it sounds mean now when I say it out loud, but then you point it out. You like,
well, we all contain multitudes, is what we say.
Leaves of grass.
Leaves of grass, yeah. But you know, so ultimately you're creating a fictional Miles Davis. Like the Miles Davis of your book is a creation. Right. This is my interpretation. You know, you can challenge it in a second. And what I loved about the Miles Davis of this book, as he is experiencing, as he is scribbling away his life, and then we have these moments of tension where the words don't match up with the visuals. I get this impression that this Miles Davis is then learning from those moments as we ramp up to the climax of this story and revelation is happening for Miles Davis. I feel like it's happening in the sequentialing.
You know, like this kind of like, I think like you want it to be that way, right? We really want him to have those revelations.
That's certainly true.
But like the spoiler part that Lisa was talking about before, like, does he really? And it's funny because like throughout his own book, his own autobiography, which I mean everyone should read. It's shocking and amazing. Throughout his autobiography, he's like, I hate looking back. I hate talking about the past. I hate looking back. It's just like hilarious that that's woven throughout this whole book about like him looking back. Yeah. So, but I'm glad that I'm glad that it pulled that out of you. I'm glad that it reads that way, and I think that's kind of like the kind of like the thing that I want. I guess I want readers to read it and be like, oh yeah, he's really like learning a lot about his life.
Okay, so all right, Lisa,
I'll let you go.
I'm not saying like he ends the book and he has learned lessons, because I think the thing that we're not talking about, the spoiler that Lisa's talking about, is a punchline of sorts to what I'm saying.
Sure.
But I guess what I was dancing around is that I feel like at times the Miles Davis you're seeing him grow based on the tension that he's feeling and we're feeling between those juxtapositions of the visuals and the words.
Yeah. I think that like that's the really fascinating thing about this guy. You know, it's just mind-blowing to me. He says that line about Charlie Parker, that he says Charlie Parker wore the best mask of anyone I've ever seen.
Yeah.
And I read that and I was like, holy shit, this is like what an amazing observation. That then when you look at that, he's like admiring this mask that this guy wore, that this dude had to wear as like a genius black man in America, right? Like he had to constantly be like wearing a mask and have his armor up, right? And then you step back and think like, well, what am I reading right now? What am I reading when I read Miles Davis's own words about his own life, right? That there's not to come down too like judgmentally about like Miles, but like there's a real like need of him to be seen as like masculine and like macho in his own book, right? But then at the same time, and even in like his own life, right? He needed that. He needed to be feared by women. And yet at the same time, he like was this very tender, sensitive person. And like in his music, there's that sensitivity that like is so heart-wrenching and like painful. And he's a trumpet player. Like you guys know trumpet players. They're like, I'm a trumpet player, right? Like it's so bizarre that like the most famous jazz trumpet player of all time is not a higher, faster, louder kind of guy. He's this player whose sound is defined by like its human qualities. It's defined by those flaws that are in it. And it's like the opposite of masculine, typically, traditionally masculine. It's this like incredibly like heart-wrenching, you know, even at its most like boisterous, like in the early 70s, there's still something about it that's not the same as like Freddie Hubbard like shredding on like red clay or whatever. For those of the listeners who don't know what I'm talking about, just Google like Freddie Hubbard red clay, and it's like you'll hear this is a trumpet player who I feel like really does embody that kind of like manly trumpet playing, which is like which is like the opposite of what Miles is like. Miles is playing on like the track off of the Jack Johnson album, not Jack Johnson the surf singer, but like he made an album that's like a soundtrack to the movie, to like a documentary film about the boxer Jack Johnson, and that's about I think his most like extroverted muscular trumpet playing. And even in that like solo, and he takes this big solo at the start of this track that's maybe like quite long. It's like pretty long as far as trumpet solos go. And he'll have stretches where he won't play for like 25 seconds of this solo. And it's like, that's all this space, that's this pregnant pause that like all you can do as a listener is like lean in and be like, what is going to happen next? You're just wondering like, what is going to happen next? And it's like, and it's never really, you never get the feeling that he's playing to prove anything. He doesn't care about proving anything to anybody. And yet then you read his words about his own life, you hear him interviewed, and it's like, and he feels like he has so much to prove. And this like Jekyll and Hyde, Gemini, kind of like twin like that lives inside of him, that's like so fascinating to me, that like just sort of like became a real like engine for this book, and sort of that like contradiction. And so to kind of like highlight some of that contradiction in the way that you can in comics between the visuals and the words, I think was my like attempt at sort of like capturing a little bit of that contradiction.
It's interesting though, like having like read your book, and that impulse to improve yourself is part of a musician's discipline. Like it's in there, like from the very beginning. You can always get better, but the only way you can do it is like sheer force of will. You know, and you set up in the beginning of your book, like he has this platonic ideal of the sound that he wants to make, and he's kind of chasing that, and in chasing that he has the ever-moving stepping stones of all of these musicians that he works with, you know? And then you think about all of the romantic relationships he went through, and you draw the parallel of the relationship with his mother, like this idea, he had this platonic ideal of the kind of man that he wanted to be. And with each different woman, he was trying to kind of like tweak a piece of himself. Like, oh, this woman, she's a snappy dresser. She makes me a snappy dresser. Oh, this woman, she's really cool. I have a coolness in me. This woman can make me more cool. Oh, this person is French. She has clearly, you know, has this kind of like European like ideal that is greater than what we feel in the United States. I feel like almost like a parallel thing of like these women are like these stepping stones to the man that he wants to be, but it's just like me trying to like keep like a running track of all the characters in this book. To him, these individuals are like something that he has to move through to get toward whom he wants to be.
That's really interesting. I mean, I think that's a really interesting point of view on it. I mean, I hate to say I didn't even think of that, but I'm sure that that's a totally insightful way of looking at his relationships throughout his life, with, you know, his romantic relationships throughout his life. Yeah, that's true.
But it goes back to like that thing in the forest. Like not every artist has the thing in the forest. Like some people I think are driven by that kind of virtuosic competitiveness, where it's just like
totally
like I'm like that happens in opera all of the time too. Like I'm an athlete, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
like I'm an athlete.
Yeah, I call it stunt music.
Yeah. And that has its place, and it's really rad. And when there are things I can't do, I feel horrible. You know what I mean? Like, oh no. But at the same time, I like, you know, there are artists that are going toward, and then there are artists that are like going away or going against.
Yeah.
You know?
I think that's the cool thing about all of the different styles of music that emerged in the 20th century out of Black America, is that it became less about pursuing an ideal, which is what you typically find in like music from like Europe and stuff. Typically, this is all just big, broad painting with a broad brush is never great, but like, here we go. Whereas like the music that emerged out of like the blues and jazz and rock and roll, and even like bluegrass and all of these different types of music that kind of like have their origins in like Black America in the early 20th century, are built around not necessarily what you can do, but what you choose to do, right? Not really like pursuing an ideal, but pursuing yourself and finding yourself in the music. So like Bob Dylan would never be an opera singer successfully, right? And yet he found himself in his music and has had quite a successful, influential career. And you could say that Miles Davis is kind of the same, where like he probably wasn't ever going to get a job in a symphony. He says so in the book. I mean, not only because he was a black man in America at the time when that he wasn't going to get hired, but like, was his trumpet playing good enough at that young age to be playing with the New York Phil? I mean, honestly, probably not. But like, was he good enough to be the best Miles Davis ever? Yeah. And he had like way more influence on the world by being himself than by pursuing an ideal. And I think that's one of the sort of like, to kind of like pull back, you know, what like jazz education in America is a tricky thing, right? Because as soon as you kind of like standardize everything, it does become a little bit about an ideal instead of a journey of self-discovery. It becomes about like higher, faster, louder, virtuoso stunt music, and it's not necessarily with not as much focus on like finding yourself in it or finding yourself through the tradition of this music, right? Which is to say, like, I couldn't just pick up like a saxophone, which I don't know how to play, and just blow as hard as I could into it and make a bunch of honking noises and be like, listen to my expression, like listen to how good I am, because there's no connection to any tradition with that. That would just be like bullshit, right? Whereas like finding yourself through the tradition of like this or that particular like style of music or musical tradition, there's real value in that. Anyway, yeah, like all of the things. I don't know.
Well, like I want to go back to something that you said in the beginning of this interview, where you're like, you know, Miles Davis is kind of the only character in the book, if you think about it one way, and you know, this book would fail the Bechdel test and all of that stuff. And then I go like, I read this book, and it's about Miles Davis. But then I read it and then I go, oh, it turns out the only character in this book is me. Like, I need to find myself. I need to find, you know, my journey to self-expression. And I need to wonder, am I running towards what I want to be? Or am I running, you know, or am I running towards the person I want to be? Or am I running against the person I am expected to be, or whatever, you know?
Yeah, that's cool. I'm so glad you guys liked this book.
Oh, we loved it.
We loved the book, Dave. And to me, it's one of these like rare miracle books where it feels like everything in your life has been building up to this graphic novel, and then you had the miracle chance to do the graphic novel, because it like the way that the universe came together for you to even do this is really incredible. Yeah,
I mean, I'm really grateful, man. I don't know what else to say. I think like with like Z2, my editor Rance Hosley, and then
we love Rance,
and then Josh Bernstein, who's I think he's the CEO right now of Z2. They both called me up one day and were just like, "We're gonna get you like the right book to do." And like, we're gonna try to get you Miles Davis. And I was like, sweet, man, let's do it. Yeah, and so like I have those guys to thank, and also like obviously the openness of, you know, the Davis estate people, and to just be open to something that could be like, you know, people. Some people have a bias against comic books, you know, and graphic novels and stuff like that. So I'm just grateful that to have been given this. And you're right, it's like a real trip, man. It's a real trip. I have to kind of remind myself when I'm like bent out of shape about this thing or that thing, like, hey man, like you're pretty lucky, dude. You're pretty much living, if you want to get like very cheesy, you could say like, I manifested this.
Yeah, you
did.
That
yes.
Just in time too, because now you're a dad. You have this whole new teacher in your life that is your little kiddo, and you're a completely different person. Like, you know, you couldn't write the book that you're promoting now. Like you have had this now transformative experience of becoming a dad. So like, it's like putting a beautiful exclamation point on the person that you were, so that you could become this next beautiful person.
That's a very cool way to look at it. I'll take that with me.
Yeah. So no stress in going to the next project.
Right. Yeah. I'm having a hard time getting pages done right now.
Oh, I bet.
But,
we can only imagine, because we're not parents.
Yeah.
We're like, we're happy. We don't need to transform. We're happy with who we are, or more
but also, Lisa, this idea that he's completed Miles Davis, you know, and so like it's such a Herculean totem in Dave's life, I would imagine. But that's not my problem. That's his problem.
It is. It's not a problem. There's no problems. Yeah, no problems. Just time management. That's the thing.
Yeah. Well, congratulations, Dave.
Levels on all things.
On many levels, on all things. Thank you so much for taking so much time to discuss the book with us. We super appreciate it, and we're excited for everyone else to get their mitts on the comic. And Dave, for those that want to continue this conversation with you online, besides your TikToks, where can they find you? Or if they want to find your TikToks, where can they find you on TikTok using what handle?
My TikTok handle is Dave Chisholm Comics. My Instagram is the Dave Chisholm. I'm on Twitter, but I don't really like it anymore.
Sure.
That's Chisholm Dave. I'm also on that new app Blue Sky that apparently is only populated by comic book people now.
We're there.
So true.
Under Dave Chisholm, and I post on that all the time. That's probably my most favoritist. That's not a thing. My favoritist one right now. And then obviously I also am on Facebook, and I'm on there more than I would like to admit, because am I a boomer? I don't know.
Just you and my dad.
All right. Far out. Yeah, but so what is social media in 2023? I don't even know. What is it? It's a nightmare.
Yeah, we're trying to figure it out.
Reliant on it.
I think we're all flying blind right now.
Yeah.
I have a Tumblr account.
I mean, time to boot up that MySpace.
Yeah, seriously. I miss the simplicity of MySpace. You had your wall, right? You had your top 8.
Yeah. Oh, my top 8.
You could embed music on that would autoplay and get you in trouble at work. If you went to the wrong MySpace page while at work. Anyway, sorry.
No, that's
good
okay.
times.
I
Good
was never
times.
on MySpace.
Oh, you missed out,
I did.
Lisa. You missed out. Well, Dave, again, thank you so much for hanging out with us. And yeah, everyone buy his book.
Yeah, buy 2.
Thank you.
Yeah. Our thanks to Dave Chisholm for talking Miles Davis and the Search for the Sound. Once again, that is coming to you from Z2 Comics on November 7th. Get those pre-orders in.
I loved being able to connect with Dave as a fellow music educator, because when you are working one-on-one with students and kind of fostering them as musicians, you constantly put yourself in the position of advocating for the way that being a musician and being part of the music world functions in your life. And you've heard it on the podcast, just the discipline, the amount of focus, and the amount of constantly honing it takes to become an accomplished musician really trains your brain.
Yeah, and of course, we are becoming huge champions of people like you, Lisa, and Dave, arts teachers. Art is under attack in a lot of school districts. Funding is disappearing. Libraries are having their books ripped off their shelves. And we need to celebrate heroes like yourself, like Dave, and all the teachers, all the librarians who are showing that there is legitimate value to the arts. We thrive as a society because of the arts. It's how we connect with each other. It's how we understand each other.
And it's also how you understand yourself. My journey as a musician informs how I think, do, and accomplish every single day. What I said at the beginning of the podcast about measuring against am I more scared or do I want this more, is not something I learned from Fantastic Fest. It's something I learned from being a musician. And I have this seminal story about when I was a kid and I was going to all of these performances and recitals and showcases, and I would cry after every single one of them. I would just become so overwhelmed, and I would just cry. And my mother says, if it makes you cry, why would you even do it? And my answer to her at that time was, because I love it. And I've taken that story, and I go to my students who have stage fright, and I say, are you afraid more than the amount that you want to get on stage? Or are you afraid less than the amount that you want to get on stage? Because there are huge things in my life that scare me to do. And I just weigh it against what my heart's desire is.
Is it worth this fear that I am feeling?
And guess what? For some of my students, it's not worth it. And then I find myself talking to the parent saying, your child loves being at the piano. It gives them peace. It brings them joy. the child I'm thinking of right now loves to practice, and she hates the idea of getting on stage. Why would you kill this thing that she loves to meet some kind of expectation that she never wants to meet?
Yeah, so the recital might not be for her. Let's just focus on the joy that she's having in the moment with that piano.
Isn't that persuasive? It hasn't changed her mom's mind at all.
Because her mom hasn't had the right teachers either. Like,
Yeah.
you know, I think back to just all the terrible education that I had around the arts, and it really took me fighting through those negative voices to end up where I am today, and it's because we don't fund the right people.
Oh, and you hear all of the time, like, well, how are they going to apply it? You know, like, well, my child is going to be a doctor, so how are they going to apply being a violinist? And, like, when you are a musician, you are practicing how to learn, how to strive, and how to execute. And it's in a way that is fun, communicative, and joyful, hopefully.
And again, I think to my point, which is a little bit different than your point, is when you're teaching those things, when you're doing all of those things, you're showing that the thing itself, the art itself, the piano, the music, is valuable as much as chemistry or biology or whatever.
You know what? I use music every single day. I'm a music teacher. It's applicable. I might not be a world famous opera singer, but there is still room for me to live a musician's life.
And even if you are not applying music every day in the way that you're applying music, the person who has been taught that music is valuable has a relationship with the music that they're encountering, right? And when you recognize that the music that you're listening to has value beyond just whatever its lyrics are or whatever, like there is meaning in the song, there is value in that song, you are open to imagination, self-reflection. And this conversation has me wanting to dive in a little bit on a rant that I have about subscription services, streaming services and the like, and how they devalue the single item, the single song, the single album, the single movie.
It gives you a sense of entitlement, like, I should be able to hear all of the things and read all of this stuff for one small fee.
But I'm not ready to have that conversation just now. We really need to get on out of here and on to the next episode, which we're going to record right after this one. Next week, we are having a conversation with another incredible cartoonist, Patrick Hovarth, also a filmmaker. His new comic, Beneath the Trees Where Nobody Sees, is unlike any other comic I've read this year. It is cuddly, and it is disturbing. It's from IDW Publishing. Get it on your radar. Subscribe to it. Go online right now. Type in those keywords, Beneath the Trees Where Nobody Sees, IDW. Look at the preview pages. Read our review of the comic on comicbookcouplescounseling.com, and you will see that this book, it's going to hit you.
It's like Dexter meets Richard Scarry's Busy Town.
And if you're into it, you're going to be into it. So we just had our latest screening at the Alamo Drafthouse in Winchester, Virginia. We screened the entire Dark Knight trilogy, complete with Christian Ward virtual intros. And we have not yet announced what our October screening is going to be because the studio rejected us. So we had to find another movie. So we're in the process of narrowing all that down, and we'll announce it real darn soon. Check the socials to see what it is. It's going to be something cool no matter what. It's just, what is that thing? I don't know. And on the Patreon feed, for those that cannot attend those screenings, we have uploaded those 3 Christian Ward virtual intros, and you can watch them there. Also, we have relaunched our Married to Singles episodes. Daniel Warren Johnson came on to talk about one of his favorite single issues, The Nom number 9 from Marvel Comics. And this week, Jason Ayers, the WWE referee superstar, has joined us to talk about the Uncanny X-Men number 183. It was a lot of fun going through that book. Kitty and Colossus, some counseling sessions are needed in that issue. But Wolverine has all the answers. So head on over to our Patreon feed to hear those conversations.
And today, Brad, did you not upload a 12-minute video of us talking to Kevin Eastman?
Yes, I did. We didn't have a ton of time with him, but it was a great opportunity to dig into Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Mutant Mayhem and some of the changes that they made in that animated movie and how he felt about one particular one at the very end of the film. And I loved his answer and how it was different than he initially felt, but then he evolved to where he ended up.
We must be feeling pretty good about that interview because we do not release video of anything.
Not too often. Not too often, but it's only 12 minutes. We need to buy a better camera. We need to get a better lighting setup. But it's Kevin Eastman. You got to put it out there, and it's on our Patreon feed. You can get access to it for just $1.
Okay, Brad, I want to leave our listeners with this final thought.
Okay.
If there's anything in this podcast that was unclear, or maybe we mumbled a little bit, or maybe our ideas were so, broad and you just didn't understand. Let me leave you with this Miles Davis quote.
Okay.
If you understood everything I say, you'd be me. Isn't that a great quote?
It's a good quote. I'm like, Lisa, what are you opening us up to?
Not criticism, because I only take words of affirmation. Where can our listeners send those words of affirmation to you?
You can find me on most social medias at MouthDork. If you have words of affirmation for our logo, you can send them to Aaron Prescott at A Cool Hand Fluke. And if you have some words of affirmation for our radical banner art and show poster, send them to Karen Charm at Karen_X-Men fan. Lisa, where can our listeners send their words of affirmation to you?
I'm always accepting words of affirmation at Sidewalk Siren on Instagram and Twitter. If you'd like to spend more quality time with us, you can subscribe to us on Podbean, Spotify, YouTube, Google, Apple Podcasts, and whatever app you prefer. We're everywhere. If you'd like to get exclusive, you can join our Patreon, where you'll get more content, including weekly bonus episodes.
Now with video.
Occasionally, very occasionally.
If you'd like to reach out and touch us electronically, you can email the podcast, cbccpodcast@gmail.com. You can visit our website, comicbookcouplescounseling.com, or follow us on all the socials at CBCC Podcast.
You can give us the gift of 5 stars on Apple Podcasts, and if you'd like to do an act of service, why not write a review of the show while you're there?
Yes, please.
We're fluent and receptive in all 5 love languages. It really warms our hearts and helps the pod.
So until next time, friends, keep your love tank full.
I just tapped the mic. And your psychic rapport open.
Doopy doopy. Bum bum ba bum bum ba ba.
You monster.
I know, I'm so
Right
sorry.
at the end, I'm furious. Let's listen to that